The harsh echo of the slap resonated through the polished marble floors, but it was the sound of the old man's body hitting the ground that cut through the office like a jagged knife. His frail body crumpled to the floor, the weight of age and sickness pushing him downward, as if his body couldn't bear the weight of his life anymore. His hands trembled as he tried to catch himself, but he didn't have the strength. His face, once weathered by years of experience, now contorted in pain as tears, silent but endless, trickled down his cheeks. "Are you out of your mind?" A sharp voice snapped through the room, the voice of someone used to control, someone who expected obedience. That voice belonged to Charlotte Reed. Her heels clicked against the marble floor as she stood tall, looking down at the man who had dared to block her path, a woman who had been raised to demand respect from everyone in her orbit. Charlotte was accustomed to the whispers of admiration and fear that followed her wherever she went. Her expensive suit, perfectly pressed, spoke of wealth and status. The golden earrings at her ears and the diamond ring on her fingers screamed power, power that no one dared question. "Get up," she ordered, her voice carrying the authority of someone used to getting what they wanted. The old man, gasping for breath, tried to lift his face, but his limbs weren't responding. He was too weak. He hadn't meant to block her path. He didn't even know how he ended up here. His heart beat painfully in his chest, each throb a reminder of his failing health. He opened his mouth to speak, but only a weak, pathetic whimper escaped. I'm sorry," he whispered, his voice hoarse, the words barely audible. Charlotte's eyes narrowed as she looked down at him with contempt, her lips curling into a sneer. "You're sorry? You're sorry for being so useless," she spat. "Do you even know where you are, old man? This is a corporate building, not some shelter for the homeless. Do you think I have time for your pathetic little antics?" The office was silent. Not a single person moved. They all knew Charlotte. They knew the power she wielded with just a word. She was the kind of person who could destroy someone's career with a single phone call, and everyone here, from the lowest intern to the highest executive, feared her. So, when they saw the old man on the ground, no one moved to help. No one even flinched. They simply continued typing, continued with their tasks, pretending nothing was happening, because helping him would be dangerous. And no one dared risk their career for a frail, sick old man. The man's hands shook as he tried to sit up, but the effort was too much. He coughed, the sound sharp and painful, as though every breath was a fight he couldn't win. His wrinkled hands pressed against his chest as he gasped for air. The sobs that racked his frail body seemed to echo throughout the room. Charlotte stepped closer, lifting her heel and preparing to kick him again, her face twisted with anger. "I said get out or I'll call security," she threatened, her voice low and dangerous, a warning in every syllable. Just then, the door to the office opened with a soft click, a subtle sound, but it caught everyone's attention. The heavy silence in the room deepened, a palpable change in the atmosphere. All eyes shifted to the doorway as the security guard straightened and the murmurs in the office suddenly stopped. Someone important had arrived, someone who commanded attention without even trying. And then he walked in. He was tall, impeccably dressed, his suit dark and perfectly tailored, exuding a quiet yet undeniable power. His presence filled the room, as if he had always belonged there, as if the office itself had been built around him. The Malik Admi, the name that struck fear into the hearts of even the most powerful people in the city. The billionaire owner of Admi Enterprises, a man whose quiet nature and impressive wealth had made him a legend in business circles across the country. People in this office had heard whispers about him, stories of his cold, calculating demeanor, but no one had ever seen him in person. And now here he was. He stopped just inside the door, his eyes moving slowly across the room, taking in the scene. His gaze settled first on the employees, then moved to the old man on the floor, still trembling and struggling to breathe. There was no shock on his face, no confusion, just stillness, a deep, unnerving stillness that made everyone in the room hold their breath. Malik's eyes lingered on the old man, his gaze sharp, like a man who saw everything without trying. Charlotte's bravado faltered for a fraction of a second. It was barely noticeable, but enough to be caught. She quickly straightened, forcing a smile, trying to regain control of the situation. "Good morning, sir," she said, her voice sweet now, almost too sweet, as if she was trying to mask the tension in the room. But Malik didn't greet her. He didn't even acknowledge her presence. His eyes remained on the old man, who, for the first time, looked up at him through blurry eyes, his chest still heaving in shallow breaths. The man's eyes widened as he saw who was standing before him, and for a moment it seemed like the pain in his body softened, as if he recognized the figure before him. Charlotte watched in confusion, a flicker of unease passing over her face. But before she could say another word, Malik's calm, measured voice cut through the silence. "Security," he said. 2 security guards immediately stepped forward, their presence almost imperceptible, but the weight of their movement made the room freeze. Charlotte relaxed for a moment, thinking that perhaps the old man would be dragged out, that this embarrassing incident would be swept under the rug. But then Malik said something that froze her in place. "Help him up," he ordered gently. Charlotte blinked, her mouth opening slightly in disbelief. "What?" she whispered, not intending for her words to escape. The guards hesitated just for a moment. The tension in the room thickened. No one had ever seen Malik Admi speak like this. No one had ever seen him show compassion, at least not in public. But his words were clear, and the guards obeyed without question. One guard knelt beside the old man, helping him sit up gently, while the other offered his arm for support. Malik walked closer to the old man. He bent down slowly, carefully, and pulled a handkerchief from his pocket, with a softness that seemed out of place in the cold, sterile office. He wiped the old man's tears away, as if the act of kindness was a familiar gesture, a routine. The entire room was silent. No one spoke. The only sound was the quiet, soft movements of Malik as he attended to the frail man. Charlotte stood there, frozen, her smile faltering. The power she had once wielded over this room, over everyone in it, suddenly felt distant, like it had been stolen from her in the blink of an eye. The old man's trembling lips parted as he looked at Malik, his voice barely a whisper. "You came?" he said, his voice thick with emotion. Malik's jaw tightened as he stood up, his eyes never leaving the old man's face. "I came," he said quietly, almost as if he'd been waiting for this moment his entire life. The office remained in a state of stunned silence. The hum of computers and the click of keyboards that had once filled the space like a constant background but now felt distant, as if the very air had shifted. Malik Admi had turned a corner in the room, his back straight and unyielding, his presence as commanding as the city itself. The employees, once too afraid to even breathe in his presence, now stood in awe, frozen in place as they watched the billionaire help the old man up from the cold floor. Charlotte Reed, standing a few paces away, felt the weight of the room pressing in on her. The power she had wielded with such ease was slipping through her fingers. The same woman who had once made people cower with a glance now seemed unsure, uncertain, and vulnerable. Her smile was gone, replaced by a rigid mask of unease. The office, once a kingdom, had suddenly become a foreign land. Malik stood motionless as the guards helped the old man to his feet. The frail man groaned slightly, his body trembling from both pain and confusion, but he was now upright, supported by the guards. His eyes, filled with both gratitude and disbelief, turned towards Malik. For a moment, they simply stared at each other, the weight of their shared history hanging in the air. Malik's gaze softened, just for a second, before he spoke in his calm, measured voice. "How are you feeling, Baba?" The word came with reverence, as if spoken not just to an elderly man, but to a figure deserving of respect and honor. The old man's lips trembled, and his voice was barely above a whisper. "Better now that I see you again." His eyes fluttered closed for a brief moment, as if the sheer emotion of the moment was too much to bear. The tear-soaked handkerchief in Malik's hand was still gently clutched by the old man, like a precious memory. The room was still as a tomb. The workers, who had been silently watching, exchanging glances just moments before, now remained frozen. It wasn't just the sight of the billionaire showing such humanity. No, it was a sense of powerlessness that had fallen over them. They had all witnessed Charlotte's cruelty, had seen how easily she'd torn down the old man, and now, in this surreal moment, they saw her entire world unraveling. Charlotte's heart pounded in her chest, but her face remained a mask. She had been in control until Malik walked in, until he spoke those quiet words, not with anger, but with a quiet authority that shook everything she thought she knew. There was power in silence, in measured steps, in looking past the surface and seeing the humanity others might ignore. Malik had just taken that power from her. She opened her mouth, but no words came out. A knot formed in her throat as she watched the scene unfold before her. Then Malik spoke again, his tone no longer gentle. There was an edge to it now, something colder, something sharper. "Charlotte," he said, and she bristled at the sound of her name, "you've caused more harm than you can imagine." He turned slowly to face her, his eyes narrowing, as if seeing her for the first time in a way she wasn't prepared for. "You spent too long forgetting that power isn't meant to crush the weak. It's meant to protect them." Charlotte's eyes flickered with confusion and defiance. I don't understand," she said, her voice trembling, despite her best efforts to sound firm. She had never once let anyone see her vulnerable. Never. But here, with Malik standing tall, with the old man slowly recover his bearings beside him, she felt it. She felt it like a crushing weight on her chest. For the first time in her life, she felt small. "I've watched you destroy people for years," Malik continued, his voice low and unwavering, each word cutting to the tension in the room. "And I've watched you use your power to break those who can't fight back." His gaze flicked back to the old man, who now stood with the support of the guards, his fragile body still trembling but steady. The guards held him gently, as though he might break, as though he was precious and irreplaceable. "You kicked him when he was down," Malik said, his voice tightening with an undercurrent of something colder. "You used your position to humiliate him. You treated him like garbage." The old man shifted slightly, as though these words reached deep into him, words that had been spoken too many times in his life. He nodded, a silent acceptance in his eyes. He'd seen it all before: cruelty, disregard, and a sense of power that made others feel invisible. But he had survived. He was still here. And that, Malik knew, was the most important thing. Charlotte, her shoulders stiffening, finally found her voice. "I didn't know who he was," she protested weakly, her words hanging in the air. The denial was there, thick and cloying. She had no idea who he was, she told herself. And even if she had, would it have changed anything? She didn't know the answer to that. Malik's gaze hardened. "That's the problem, Charlotte," he said softly. "You didn't care to know. You never bothered to ask, to look, to see the people who built this empire." He took a slow step toward her, his presence overwhelming, like a storm that was about to break. "You never asked because it didn't matter to you." He paused, locking eyes with her, the weight of his gaze enough to freeze her in place. "You saw him as a hindrance, an inconvenience." Charlotte's breath quickened. The walls she had built around herself, walls of power and intimidation, were crumbling before her. She had always used her position to make people fear her. But now, In front of Malik Admi, she felt like nothing, a small, insignificant blip in the world he had built. The feeling was alien to her. She had never felt this way. "I'm not done with you," Malik said, turned to face the others in the office, his voice ringing out with a quiet certainty. "But this man, this old man," he motioned toward Baba, who now stood tall, though still fragile. "He is the reason this company exists. He's the reason I'm standing here." The office was silent, every eye on Malik, every ear listening intently. Baba's eyes widened, and he looked up at Malik, confusion and disbelief mixing in his gaze. But there was something else there now, a deep, quiet sense of peace. "I owe him everything," Malik continued, his words slow and deliberate, "because without him I wouldn't be here." The silence that followed Malik's words seemed to stretch endlessly, the weight of his statement hanging in the air like a thick fog. For a moment, no one moved, no one spoke. The office had become a battleground of emotions. Fear, confusion, disbelief, and something that lingered unspoken, guilt. Charlotte Reed, standing just a few feet away from Malik, felt as though the very ground beneath her feet had shifted. The power she had once held so tightly, like a vice, now seemed like a distant memory, slipping through her fingers. She tried to steady her breath, her palms slick with sweat, but no amount of composure could hide the storm brewing within her. She had underestimated him. She had underestimated the quiet giant standing before her, a man whose presence filled the room not with noise, but with a calm, unshakable certainty. And now he had turned the tables. Now she was the one who was on trial, the one whose every action was being dissected, every motive exposed. Her throat felt dry, but she swallowed, trying to muster some defense, some excuse. "I didn't know who he was," she repeated, her voice unsteady this time, more desperate than before. "I didn't know. If I had, I would have." "You would have what?" Malik cut her off, his tone still calm, but now carrying an edge, as if each word was deliberate, calculated. "Would you have treated him differently if you knew who he was? Would you have shown him the respect he deserved, or would you have continued to treat him as invisible, as an inconvenience?" Charlotte opened her mouth, but no words came. She couldn't answer him, because deep down she knew the truth. She had seen people like him all her life, the old, the weak, the ones who didn't matter in the world she inhabited. She had never once cared enough to look beyond the surface, and that, more than anything else, was her failure. Malik turned his gaze back to the workers in the room. They were watching now, their eyes shifting from Charlotte to Baba, to Malik. They had seen it all, the cruelty, the power abuse, the indifference. And now they saw Malik's quiet justice. "You all watched?" Malik said, his voice rising slightly, but still maintaining its eerie calm. "You watched as she kicked him. You watched as he begged for help. You watched as he cried on the floor, and you did nothing." He looked at each of them in turn, his eyes piercing, assessing. "What does that say about you? About this company?" There was a long pause as the room remained silent. No one spoke. The shame in the air was palpable, thick enough to choke on. A few of the employees, who had once been loyal to Charlotte, looked away, unwilling to meet Malik's gaze. Others shifted uneasily in their seats, discomfort creeping in. Malik's eyes softened as he turned back to Baba, who still stood by the guards, his face flushed with a mix of exhaustion and relief. "Baba," Malik said softly, his voice steady now, "I owe you everything. This company wouldn't exist without you." Baba's eyes widened, his breath catching as he looked at Malik. He had not expected this. He had never expected any of this. All his life, he had given, had sacrificed, had watched as those more powerful than him took what they wanted and left it with nothing but scraps. But here, in this moment, Malik had changed that. Malik had made the invisible man visible, had made his sacrifice meaningful. I don't know what to say, Baba whispered, his voice thick with emotion. I never asked for this. I only wanted to help. Malik gave a small nod, as if acknowledging the weight of Baba's words. You didn't have to ask, Malik said. You saved my life, and for that, I'll never forget. The room fell silent again. But this time, the silence wasn't uncomfortable. It wasn't the kind of silence that suffocated you, like the one that had hovered in the air when Charlotte's cruelty was on full display. This silence was different. It was a quiet understanding, a collective realization that things were about to change. Malik turned to Charlotte, his expression hardening once more. You may have the power to ruin careers, to crush people under your heel, but you don't have the power to erase humanity. You don't have the power to decide who deserves respect and who doesn't. Charlotte's lips trembled, and for the first time in a long while, she felt something she hadn't in years. Fear. True, raw fear. The kind of fear that came not from losing a job or a position, but from losing yourself, from realizing you had become something cold, something cruel, something unrecognizable. I didn't mean, she started, but her voice cracked and she faltered. She had never been one to apologize, never one to admit fault. She had always prided herself on her ability to dominate, to bend others to her will. But in front of Malik, in front of the workers, and most importantly, in front of Baba, she knew that her power meant nothing. Enough, Malik said, his voice low and final. He raised his hand, silencing her. Your actions speak for themselves. I don't need your words. He turned to the guards. Escort her out, he ordered. Charlotte's heart pounded in her chest as she stood frozen. For a brief moment, she considered protesting, considered fighting back, but something in her gut told her it would be useless. Malik had already won. The room had already turned its back on her. As the guard stepped forward, Charlotte took one last look around the room, her eyes meeting the faces of the workers who had once feared her. Now, they looked at her with pity, with disdain. She had no power here anymore. She turned, her head bowed, and left the room without another word. The office door closed softly behind Charlotte, and the oppressive silence that followed felt like the calm before a storm. The workers were still seated, their eyes downcast, the weight of the moment pressing down on them. The tension in the air was thick, a palpable reminder of the confrontation that had just unfolded. Malik stood in the center of the room, his back straight, his gaze steady. He hadn't raised his voice, hadn't needed to. His words, like sharp blades, had cut through the atmosphere, exposing Charlotte's cruelty for everyone to see. Now, as the room slowly returned to life, the shift in power was undeniable. The fragile peace between the employees and their once dominant boss had been shattered, and in its place, an uneasy calm settled in. But even as the workers began to stir, Malik's mind was far from the tension in the room. His thoughts were still with Baba, the frail old man who had, unknowingly, changed everything. Baba's quiet strength had been the catalyst that turned this office upside down, the moment of truth that had forced the system to look at itself. Malik had known Baba's importance, but he hadn't known the full depth of his sacrifice. Not until today. He glanced over at Baba, who was still sitting with the guards by his side. The old man's chest rose and fell with the shallow rhythm of his breathing, but his eyes, though tired, held a quiet dignity that hadn't been there before. For the first time, he looked like a man who had been seen, truly seen, for who he was. Malik took a deep breath and walked toward him. His footsteps echoed softly against the floor, a steady, purposeful rhythm. As he neared Baba, the old man looked up at him, his face softening with the recognition of the man who had saved him from a lifetime of being forgotten. Baba, Malik said, his voice low and steady, How are you feeling? Baba's lips trembled, but he managed to speak, his voice barely a whisper. I'm all right, just tired. His eyes flickered, a moment of confusion passing over his features. I didn't expect any of this. Malik nodded, his gaze never leaving Baba's. You didn't expect the world to change for you, did you? He let the words linger in the air before continuing. But sometimes the world changes for the ones who need it most. Baba's eyes glistened with unshed tears. I didn't ask for any of this, he whispered again, his voice breaking. I just wanted to pass through. I didn't want trouble. Malik placed a hand on Baba's shoulder, the gesture soft and reassuring. Sometimes, Baba, trouble finds you whether you want it or not. But today, we make sure that trouble is used to make things right. There was a long pause as Malik stood in front of Baba, their connection deeper than words could describe. For a moment, it felt as though time had stopped, the world outside the office continuing without them, unaware of the quiet transformation taking place inside. Let me help you get out of here, Malik said finally, his voice firm, yet full of care. We'll get you the treatment you need. I'll make sure no one forgets you again. Baba's eyes softened, a small but grateful smile tugging at the corners of his lips. Thank you, he whispered. Thank you for remembering. Malik nodded once, a silent promise that spoke louder than any words. He turned to the room, his gaze sweeping across the workers, his voice breaking the silence once more. I want all of you to understand something, he said, his tone firm and clear. This company was built on the backs of people who work hard, people who sacrificed everything. You all contribute to its success, but none of that matters if we forget the human element in the process. If we start seeing people as tools, as disposable, then everything we built here is meaningless. The workers looked up at him, their eyes wide, each of them processing the weight of his words. Some shifted uncomfortably in their chairs, while others nodded slowly, the realization dawning on them that they had been complicit in a system that dehumanized those around them. Malik paused, let his words sink in. Then he added, From this point forward, we will treat everyone with dignity. The cleaners, the maintenance staff, the security guards. They are just as important as anyone in this room. This company will not survive if we forget that. A murmur spread through the room, an unspoken acknowledgement of the change that was happening. Malik's gaze lingered on each of them, his expression unwavering. He was making sure they understood that this was not a fleeting moment, not a temporary shift. This was a new beginning. Baba, who had remained silent, gave a soft sigh, his weary body finally relaxing into the chair. His eyes met Malik's one last time, the faintest hint of a smile crossing his lips. Go on, Baba, Malik said gently. You've earned your rest. As the guards helped Baba to his feet, Malik watched him leave the room, his heart heavy but full. The old man's departure felt like the closing of one chapter, the beginning of another. The room felt different now, quieter, but in a way that suggested something much deeper was happening beneath the surface. When the door closed behind Baba, Malik turned back to the workers. They were no longer looking at him with fear or awe. They were looking at him with respect, with understanding, as if the shift had already begun in their hearts. Now, Malik said, his voice softer but no less determined, we clean up the mess, not just here, but in how we operate. We start treating each other as human beings, not numbers or obstacles. He paused, looking around the room one last time. And if anyone has a problem with that, you're free to leave. No one will stop you. The room remained silent. No one moved. The next morning, the buzz of the office was different. There was an undercurrent of nervous energy, but it wasn't the kind of tension that came from fear of reprimand or failure. It was something else, a sense of anticipation, like everyone in the room was waiting for something to break. for the storm that had begun with Baba's confrontation to fully unfold. Malik Admi had changed the air in the office, but his presence alone wasn't enough to erase the years of cruelty, of power used recklessly and without conscience. His words had made their mark, but the real shift would come from the actions that followed. The transformation of the company was no longer a hypothetical. It was happening slowly, but undeniably. Malik had left the office the night before with one clear directive. Change was coming. For those who feared losing their position or their power, the question was no longer whether they could survive the shift. It was whether they would adapt or be left behind. As the day began, the workers filed in, their expressions guarded, unsure of what was coming. Malik's influence had made waves, and those waves hadn't stopped. At the far end of the office, Charlotte Reed's desk was now vacant. Her absence spoke volumes, but the ripple effect of her departure hadn't reached its peak. The company's upper echelons were waiting for their own reckoning. Malik entered the office just before noon, the heavy door swinging open to announce his arrival. This time, no one dared to look away from him. No one dared to pretend they weren't paying attention. He had become more than just a billionaire boss. He had become a symbol of change, of moral justice that no one had expected, but everyone needed. Malik's gaze swept across the office. It was quieter now, as though the building itself had absorbed the weight of the past day's events. His eyes settled on Daniel Cosm, the head of operations, standing by the water cooler, trying his best to look unfazed. But Malik saw the tension in his shoulders, the tightness around his jaw. Daniel had always been careful. He was the kind of man who moved through life like a shadow, quiet, reserved, but always calculating. But that silence now felt different. The cracks in his facade were starting to show. "Daniel," Malik called, his voice low but sharp. The room stilled as Daniel turned to face him. The moment felt surreal. Everyone in the office had heard the whispers, heard how Malik had shattered the comfortable routine of power in this place. No one had expected it to happen like this. Daniel's eyes narrowed slightly as he stepped forward, trying to mask a flicker of uncertainty. "Yes, sir?" Malik's eyes were cold, focused. "Come with me?" Without waiting for a response, Malik turned and walked down the hallway toward the conference room. Daniel hesitated for a moment before following, his feet slow, reluctant, as if he already knew where this was headed. The door to the conference room clicked shut behind them, the silence inside thick, almost suffocating. Malik stood at the head of the table, his posture unyielding, as Daniel slowly made his way to the opposite side. "Sit," Malik ordered. Daniel complied, though the discomfort in his movements was impossible to miss. He had been through corporate confrontations before, but nothing like this. Nothing like the power Malik exuded, the calm fury that radiated from him like an invisible force. For a moment, neither of them spoke. The silence was deliberate, a calculated pause in which Malik let Daniel sweat, let him feel the weight of the moment. Finally, Malik broke the silence. "Do you remember what you said to me yesterday, Daniel?" Malik's voice was quiet, but the words hung heavy in the air. Daniel shifted uncomfortably in his seat, his eyes avoiding Malik's. I don't understand what you mean." Malik's lips curled into a faint, cold smile. "The part where you said you were streamlining the system. That old man, Baba, you removed him from the list, took away his medical support. Why?" Daniel's face tightened, his hands clenched in his lap, but he remained silent, as if waiting for the right moment to defend himself. But Malik didn't give him the opportunity. "You've seen the files, Daniel," Malik said, his tone growing colder with every word. "You knew who Baba was. You knew his role in the company's history. And yet, you still chose to erase him. For profit. For efficiency. For what exactly?" Daniel swallowed hard, tried to mask the fear that was now creeping into his veins. He had been part of the system for too long, to be caught off guard. But this was different. This wasn't just about office politics or ambition. This was about humanity, and he was quickly realizing how badly he had missed the mark. "I didn't think it was a big deal," Daniel finally muttered, his voice shaken with the first hint of panic. He wasn't contributing anymore. He wasn't even on the payroll. He was old. He couldn't work. "We can't keep people around who aren't useful, Malik. That's not how business works." Malik leaned forward slightly, his eyes locking onto Daniel's. "And that's where you went wrong," he said quietly. "Business isn't just about numbers. It's about the people who make your empire." Daniel flinched. It wasn't like him to be unsettled, but Malik's words were cutting deeper than any criticism he'd faced in his career. Malik stood up, his gaze unwavering. "I'm not interested in hearing excuses, Daniel. Your position here is finished. You've crossed a line that I can't ignore." Daniel's face drained of color, the realization of what was happening settling in. "No," he whispered, panic rising in his chest. "You can't." "I can," Malik said firmly, his voice as cold as ice. "And I will." Malik turned to the door, signaling the two guards standing silently by the entrance. "Escort Daniel to the HR office. Immediately." Daniel's chair scraped loudly against the floor as he shot up, but it was too late. The guards were already at the door, waiting to take him away. His face flushed with anger, confusion, and fear all at once, but he knew it was over. His hands shook as he stumbled toward the door, the reality of his fall from power crashing over him. Malik watched as Daniel was escorted out, his expression unreadable. It wasn't just about punishment. It was about sending a message. And that message was clear. There will be no tolerance for cruelty. Not anymore. As the door shut behind Daniel, Malik turned back to the workers in the office. They were all watching him now, their faces filled with a mix of awe and something else. Something harder to identify. But Malik knew what they were thinking. He had taken a stand. Not just for Baba, but for everyone who had been overlooked, dismissed, or crushed under the weight of ambition and greed. And this was just the beginning. The office was quieter than it had ever been. Malik had done more than shift the power dynamics. He had rewritten the rules of the game, and now everyone in the room knew it. The consequences were still rippling through the building. It wasn't just the employees who felt the weight of the changes. The walls, once lined with the pride of the system built on ambition and ruthlessness, now felt too small, too confining. The air felt dense with expectation, a palpable shift that no one could ignore. But as the morning wore on, Malik knew that the work was far from over. The employees, though subdued, still carried the ghosts of their old habits. The silent whispers, the uneasy glances, the broken systems that had allowed abuse to thrive. He had already cleaned house with Daniel, but there were still others to deal with, others who had turned a blind eye, or worse, profited from the broken system. And there was still Charlotte. Malik couldn't afford to let the previous night's confrontation be seen as a one-off. He couldn't afford to be merciful, not yet. He had come into this building with a vision, to make this company about more than just power, to make it about respect, about humanity. And he wasn't about to back down just because a few people were uncomfortable. The door to the conference room opened, and Malik stepped inside, his expression calm and determined. He looked out across the room at the few remaining members of the board. They had all been with the company for years, some since its early days, others riding the wave of success brought by a system of unchecked power. Their eyes followed him, hesitant, as if waiting for the next shoe to drop. Malik didn't waste time. "I've spent the past week cleaning up this mess," he said, his voice cutting to the tension in the room. "But I'm not done yet." There was a collective breath, as if the room had been holding its air since Malik had walked in. The members of the board knew what was coming. They had seen his decisions unfold with Daniel, with Charlotte, and they knew that Malik wasn't going to pull any punches. One of the men, Richard Carson, a senior board member, leaned forward in his seat, the faintest trace of defiance in his eyes. "You can't just purge the entire system, Malik," he said, trying to steady his voice. "We built this company, and now you want to throw away everything we've worked for?" Malik raised an eyebrow, his gaze never leaving Richard's face. "The company you built?" he asked, his tone clipped, but measured, "or the company you exploited? Tell me, Richard, how many people's lives have you ruined to get where you are?" Richard stiffened, but Malik wasn't finished. "This company didn't grow because of you. It grew because of the people you overlooked, the people you took advantage of. And that stops today." He paused, letting the words sink in. The board members shifted uncomfortably in their seats, glancing at each other. They could feel the shift in the air, the quiet authority in Malik's voice. They knew he wasn't playing games anymore. "The system has to change," Malik continued, his eyes scanning the room. "And if you're not with me, then you're against me." The words hung in the air like a challenge, sharp and unyielding. Malik wasn't asking for compliance. He was demanding it, and he knew that some of them would be unwilling to bend. "Now, let's talk about Charlotte." The name cut through the room like a knife. The board members exchanged uneasy looks. Richard was the first to break the silence. "She's already been dealt with, Malik. What more do you want from her?" Malik's eyes were cold as ice. "You're not hearing me. Charlotte is the symptom of a much larger problem. She's not the only one who's done things like this. You all have blood on your hands." Richard's face reddened, but Malik wasn't fazed. He was too focused, too determined to let anything derail him. "I'm going to restructure this company. From the ground up, the way we treat employees, the way we treat each other. This is not about a few bad apples. It's about a whole rotten system. A system that has let power corrupt and destroy everything good about this place. And I'm done." He stepped forward, letting the weight of his words settle in the room. "Either you step up or you leave. This company is going to be built on something different." As the words echoed in the room, the board members sat still, processing the gravity of what was being asked of them. The fear in their eyes wasn't the kind of fear they felt when Charlotte ran things, the kind of fear that came from power being wielded without consequence. This was different. This was real. This was change. Malik let the silence stretch for a moment, then turned, signaling the end of the meeting. "Let's get to work." The door clicked shut behind him, and Malik walked back to his office, his footsteps steady, his mind already moving to the next phase of his plan. The change was happening, whether they were ready for it or not. The company was shifting, and those who couldn't keep up would be left behind. But even as Malik made his way down the hallway, something gnawed at him, something he couldn't ignore. The vision he had of this company, of the world he was trying to build, wasn't just about making the powerful fall. It was about showing people that their worth wasn't defined by power. It was about giving them something they had never had before, a voice. He couldn't change the system overnight, but he was going to make sure that every person in this company, from the lowest paid worker to the highest executive, was seen, was heard. As he entered his office, Malik looked out the window, his eyes narrowing as he gazed at the skyline of New York City. He could see the future stretching out before him. An empire built on a foundation of respect and humanity, a place where no one was invisible. But it wasn't going to be easy. There were more battles to fight, more people to convince, and more walls to break down. But Malik was ready for it. He had already started the war.